Now let's go live to Keith Pitt, Nationals MP, who's joining us from Brisbane to talk politics of the day. Thank you for joining us, Keith. Now, we do know the big topic today for the Prime Minister is his trip to the Pacific Island Forums, and top of the agenda there, at least for those leaders, is climate change. And the push that we've seen has been around a commitment for Australia to ditch coal. Do you think Australia should be listening to the concerns of these Pacific Island nations about the impact climate change is having on them?
Well, we always consult closely with our nearest neighbours. The Pacific's a very important part of our local region. I mean, we are one of the Pacific Islands, and I do note our commitment of $500 million over the next 10 years towards a number of resilience projects. But what I've also heard this morning was Minister Alex Hawke's interview on ABC, where he relayed some of the comments from Prime Minister Bainimarama from Fiji. We are all sovereign nations. We do all make our own decisions. And certainly I expect that there'll be a negotiation around a communique from all the leaders at the PIF, as there always is.
When it comes to the Pacific Islands and the small Pacific states, they've said that they want to see a commitment in the final communique to phase out coal. As you said, Minister Hawke has ruled that out, saying that's a red line for Australia, given its importance to our economy. Is there a middle ground, though, do you think? Do you think the government has done enough with this $500 million finance commitment on climate change, or will there basically never be enough that we can do, given this is an existential threat as far as they see it?
Well, I think one of the challenges is having a balanced response to what is our contribution in terms of world emissions. We took our position to the Australian people at the election. It's been accepted overwhelmingly by them. We are doing our part. However, we do need to consider our own economy, and the resources sector is a very important part of what we do as a nation. So, we will always continue to discuss and negotiate with Pacific Island leaders, and in particular Papua New Guinea, who are our closest neighbours. We support them all very, very strongly, and I'm sure that there will be an agreed communique out of the Pacific Island Forum, as there has been many times before.
There is always that threat that there isn't a communique at the end of a forum. We saw that happen at APEC last year with China and the US not being able to agree on terms. Would it be worth Australia drawing that line in the sand and saying that they can't commit to anything that would say that we should be getting rid of coal power?
Well, on that specific item, I refer you back to Minister Hawke's comments this morning. He said that is something we won't include. And having been involved in some of these negotiations in a former portfolio many times, I look at RCEP, for example, as a trade negotiation. We spent all day to get one line out for the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So these can be challenging diplomatic discussions and negotiations. But we've got a very strong team there. I'm pleased that Scott Morrison's showing leadership on the Pacific, and I'm sure it'll be successful.
Because it does obviously have much bigger broader implications, doesn't it, for Australia in terms of a strategic view and a sense that China's been increasing its influence in the Pacific. That's the context within which this Pacific Island Forum is being held, isn't it?
But once again, there is a change in the world order. As we all know, it's one of the reasons that we have a new foreign policy white paper, which was developed under former Minister for the Foreign Affairs, Julie Bishop, which sets out our our strategy for the next 10 years at least. So, these are challenging times, but we do have the right team in place. We continue to talk with those individual leaders throughout the Pacific. But, if it is about emissions, Australia's contribution is less than 2%. And some of those other larger nations, their contribution in terms of world emissions are much more substantial. So, if this is the only thing on which we negotiate, then we need to take a balanced view.
Now, when it comes to what's happening in Parliament today, we have the PJCIS meeting on press freedoms and hearing evidence from some very senior security officials. What would you like to see come out of this hearing in regards to press freedom and any kind of intelligence from our intelligence committees?
Well, it's not about what I want or what I want to see. I think it's about our democracy, it's about the Australian people and what their view is, and it's about ensuring that we do strike the right balance between national security and freedom of the press. It is one of the fundamental pillars of our democracy. I support it very strongly. but we need to ensure that we do get the balance right in a changing world environment. We've put forward this committee, submissions are being taken, and I'm sure that there will be changes and recommendations that come as a result of the committee being formed.
One of the things that's been discussed is the idea that we adopt a judicial oversight of a warrant in cases like we've seen in recent times with the ABC and the News Corp reporter Annika Smethurst. This already operates in the UK and Canada as well, where a judge would decide on any subsequent warrant. That seems to make a lot of sense, at least at the very minimum in this case, don't you think?
Look, I don't want to preempt what the outcomes of the committee inquiry may well be, but we obviously have to maintain separation of powers. It is the other fundamental in terms of our democracy, and we do need to ensure that journalists are protected, as are whistleblowers. So if there are changes to be made and the recommendations as a result of this committee call for those changes, well, I'm sure they'll be considered in all seriousness. I've got great faith in Christian Porter. He is a very capable individual as Attorney General. I'm an electrician, not a lawyer, so it's certainly at that sort of level, it's not my field.
And just finally, up in Queensland, where you are at the moment, there's some discussion about regulations for the Great Barrier Reef and what should be done to protect that. Obviously quite on point with the climate change discussion that's happening today. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think the state Labor government, if I can be really frank, needs to pull their head in. I'm tired of people talking down the reef. If you look at the reports, the bottom half of the reef is actually in some of the best condition it's been in for more than 10 years. It is a great tourism asset. It's not dying. Parts of it are in fabulous condition. But once again, we need to get the balance right. But here we have a state Labor government who's suggesting farmers in my area, for example, need to have a whole heap of additional overheads and costs and certainly administrative processes they've never had before on the basis they protect the reef. Well, the reef's about 80 kilometres from the mouth of the Burnett River in my area. All of the available science that I can see says it's incredibly unlikely that there'll be runoff that actually gets to the reef itself, and yet they're going to be lumbered with these additional costs. I just think it's, the state Labor government are chasing green votes. They're not interested in our farming community. We know what they've done to fishing. They're trying to knock out forestry. I think it's wrong, and I think they need to be challenged, and rightly so.
A lot of people obviously rely on tourism jobs too, though, and reef is central to that, isn't it?
But once again, I mean, I defy individuals to tell me that the reef is in terrible condition for at least half of its components. That is what is in the reports, that the water quality is good, that in fact the reef is in very good condition. It's replaced some of those sections which were very badly damaged as a result of a cyclone. I mean, when you get a big cyclone, a Cat 5 that comes through, it can wipe out 80 kilometres in a strip all the way to the coast. It's just terrible. But a lot of that has regrown. I mean, it's a living organism. We need to stop talking it down and talk about what's happening in a positive light, because there's a really good story to tell.
Keith Pitt, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.